Hey there, Internet. So here I am with one of the filmmakers who made Fauci and one of the subjects of the film. Can you introduce yourselves?
My name is John Hoffman. I am the co-director of Fauci.
And I'm Peter Staley, a long-term AIDS activist who also appears in the film.
All right, let's talk about this movie. So, from what I understand, you started filming this movie before coronavirus, before the pandemic. Is that correct?
Janet, my co-director, was talking to Dr. Fauci about making this film before the outbreak. And once the outbreak happened, I reached out to the NIH, where I had done a lot of work. I've done a lot of documentaries about, addiction, Alzheimer's, obesity, for HBO, Discovery, Net Geo. And I reached out saying, I'd love to do a film about Dr. Fauci. And so they said, do you know Janet? And I said, I do. So we teamed up, and that's when the film really began, is when, in March of 2020. Because Dr. Fauci knew us both from prior work, and his family knew us both from prior work, there was a tremendous amount of trust that was there from the very beginning. And we're really privileged that he gave us the kind of access that he did.
Mm-hmm. What would you say was like the most challenging part about making this film? And for you, what was the most challenging interview question, I imagine, going back to that time period?
Yeah, I mean, you get, as you see in the film, Fauci has a moment of looking back at the early AIDS years, where he gets choked up and caught off guard by his own emotional reaction. And so revisiting that time period and seeing all that footage again of me getting arrested in front of his building, and it brings up a lot. And a lot of the footage of the protests had friends of mine who are no longer alive. So there's a lot of ghosts in this footage. So it's hard to watch in that respect. But, and that's, so we're all suffering from PTSD, as Tony calls it in the film. And it was rough to see him correctly diagnose all of us in that regard. So.
How about for yourself? What did you find the biggest challenge creating this documentary?
I think the biggest challenge is when you're doing a portrait of somebody who has accomplished so much. Tony Fauci is 80 years old. He's been the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases for 40 years. He's been a public servant for 50 years. The film, his life is really defined by the two great pandemics of our time, HIV and AIDS. But there's SARS, and there's Ebola, and there's MERS, and the list goes on. And he's testified before Congress more than any other person in history. So the archive is just vast, and the important ways in which he has served this country, are just more than we could ever fit into a film. But when you're working the way at least I and my team work, you gather it all. So how do you distill that down? And those are tough choices, because there's a lot of very dramatic moments in his life that we couldn't include.
Mm-hmm. That's perfect lead into my next question, which is, I can imagine looking over hundreds of hours of archival footage. There's tons of stuff that gets left on the cutting room floor. Was there one particular favorite deleted scene that you have? Outtake, or was there something that you wanted to say in the film that maybe didn't make it in there?
There are remarkable clips that we couldn't include. There are appearances that Tony did in the early days of AIDS where there's such confusion amongst the, quote, general population about how AIDS is transmitted. And there are such myths that he's having to constantly dispel. The way that people, I mean, adults, clearly, educated, smart people, the unbelievably stupid things that they are saying about the risk of AIDS, and the position that he's having to be in on Donahue and other talk shows. You see in the film one moment where he's on a CNN show, and the stunning homophobia that is expressed in front of him by the moderator, and he's in this incredibly awkward position where he's on live television on CNN, and how do you counter that effectively and diplomatically? But we could have shown 20 more examples of that, and they're just it's hard not to.
It's almost like something that could be an episodic TV show or something. It just feels like there's a lot of history that you contained in that almost 2-hour window.
Right.
So I'd love to hear,
Right.
you were in the film for a little bit, but I'm sure you could speak hours on.
Yeah, I mean, I was. I think they probably weren't able to capture this on film because Tony's too careful in this regard. But the past year with Trump, that epic battle, to be able to be talking with him. And to hear his uncensored take on that whole battle would have been great if in a weak moment he had expressed some of that. You get him to do the F-bomb at one point, but he was combining the F-bomb with the former president's name in sentences. When he was on the phone, he'll kill me for saying that, but he's a little too careful in that regard. I think never wants to be seen as too political, which is probably the reason he's been able to influence one way or the other every president he's ever worked with.
I felt when I watched the movie there was a lot of danger he was in. Especially the scene where, they talk about him getting a letter in the mail that had powder in it. Did you ever feel in danger when making this film?
No, never.
What about now that it's out there? I mean, I looked on IMDb, I see all these crazy people out there writing reviews, probably have never even seen it. I don't know. I also think a lot about how in the film, you first look at him as the bad guy, and then slowly through time you discover, his intentions are good. He's trying to help people. What do you think is important for you to say to these conspiracy theorists out there who maybe are going to look back and say, he's doing the right thing?
No, I even see some of these anti-Fauci crazies using some of the early anger of AIDS activists as one of the tools in their toolbox for condemning the man. But our criticism of him from the get-go was that he was in charge of a scientific enterprise that we knew was the only thing that could save our lives. We knew that science was the only thing that could save our lives. The current critics don't believe in science at all. They are anti-science, and they've gone off the rails and created conspiracy theories about Tony Fauci that obviously have no basis in reality. So it's apples and oranges. And while he was a target because we were pushing him to do more and do it faster, from the get-go, when we met him, we realized the basic humanity of the man and that he was on the same page as us about how much he cared about ending AIDS. The larger movement of ACT UP may have continued to use very strong graphics in the demos and he's the enemy, he's target number one, but the activists within the movement that started talking with him on an ongoing basis, it wasn't a slow ideation of coming to respect the man. that respect almost happened immediately. It was very obvious where he was coming from.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious to know if you could have added an extra chapter onto the film, you know, post everything that, you know, you're done filming it and the editing and what we're seeing happen now with Delta and this and that. What do you imagine that final chapter could be?
Well, I think that some of the final words from Tony in the film are about this never-ending battle between the virus's spectacular genetic ability and man's wits. And this is the case. Viruses have killed more people in the history of mankind than anything else. So, you know, and we are going to be battling viruses for the rest of eternity. I think that there you could go into that in more depth, in that, so that people really understand the enormous scientific and medical challenge that are viruses. You know, they're a fragment of DNA. There's a debate, is it an organism or not? It is not alive outside of its host. Mm-hmm. You know, it's just a fragment of DNA sitting there or in the air, and it can't reproduce on its own. They're a mystery. They are a conundrum. And I think that we have to be humble in the face of the viruses that are infectious to humans, cause disease. There are tons of viruses that are throughout our bodies all the time that are essential to life, but there are these few that have destroyed civilizations. And to think that any one of us is stronger than that is a sort of, you know, an unfortunate bit of, you know, arrogance in a sense. And so I think that to go a little bit further, if there's an addendum, because we see Delta and then there's Mu now, what's next, is something that we really have to all have a little bit more humility in the face of viruses.
One scientific dream he's had is, which is he knows is doable, is to create a kind of class of broad spectrum vaccines where it's just you inoculate the entire population with one flu vaccine, and it covers all future iterations of the flu. Same thing with coronaviruses, you know, a broad spectrum coronavirus vaccine. Theoretically, it's very doable. It's going to take a substantial investment by the US government, and hopefully they'll make that investment.
Very good. What is the next project on the horizon?
Well, I can't tell you what the next project is because it's not announced yet, but I'm you know, very happy to be, you know, already in production on a new documentary.
That's very exciting. Congratulations to both of you on this amazing film. It is going to be available streaming eventually through Nat Geo, I imagine, yes?
Through Disney Plus.
Through Disney Plus.
Starting in October.
October, the date we don't know yet, but
6.
October 6th, you can finally check out the documentary. I thought it was great. Thank you again for your time. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that I should have asked you or that you want to talk about? Did I miss anything?
No, that's good.
That's it? All right. Thank you all for watching. Hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button. Go to their page. Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button. We'll see you in the next video. Bye.